12-year-olds, dude. 12-year-olds. Back again with another review. Thanks for checking out the channel. My name is Josh, and we are here to talk about, of course, if you clicked on the thumbnail, Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon. House of the Dragon, not House of Dragons, which I've been previously calling it. So, House of the Dragon, and this is episode 2, and this is The Rogue Prince. So this is a pretty interesting episode. It picks up right after where episode 2 leaves off, more or less. There's a little bit of a time jump in there. I'm not exactly sure at what point it happens, but this one's really talking about or working on Rhaenyra, trying to figure out her role and kind of where she needs to be, and if she oversteps boundaries, or what her actual boundaries are. We have that. We've got King Viserys that's being pushed towards marriage for the good of the realm, but now to who? That's up for debate a little bit. And then you have Prince Daemon, who's acting out a little bit. Prince Daemon's making moves by kind of really not listening to his brother the king at all. So instead of doing what he was told and returning to his wife and things like that, he's actually done quite the opposite. He's gone to Dragonstone and taken with him an army basically of the city guards. So what do they call them? The yellow capes? I believe they have that like built into their armor, like the little yellow cape. So he's got an army of those at Dragonstone, where he's kind of been and sequestered. I did say it's been 6 months, so there's a little bit of a time jump since the death of... Okay, so spoilers if you haven't watched episode 1, but we're on episode 2, so we gotta kind of talk about a little bit of things. Death of the heir and the queen. So since that, and then the whole rigmarole with who was going to be in charge, and Rhaenyra being named the successor, Daemon didn't take that excessively well and bolted out over there. So he's over there with his, I mean, they call her Lady of the Night, or actually they call her much more unpleasant things, but basically it's who he wants to be his new wife, and they talk about that in a little bit. But he's out over there doing that, making moves. I don't really know what he's doing, if he's just being more like a petulant child or just trying to get attention, or if he's actually, in for the benefit of the Targaryen family. I don't know. We'll have to see. You have that going on. You have Rhaenyra, who's basically trying to figure out what her role is. I mean, I think she still is not 100% sure that she's her father's main choice for the job, but she's kind of the default for what we have, which comes up a couple times. And you have the king himself. The king is really put in a situation now where he has his own interest, that he wants to mourn his wife and passing of his son, things like that, but he also has a responsibility to rule the 7 realms, 7 kingdoms, so the realm, and that really is done by he needs to marry again. And there's a lot of folks in play on this part specifically, where there's different people putting their interest in and throwing some stuff out there. So we have our main characters, and basically what's been happening, and the take home I have with most of them is we have our King Viserys, whether I'm saying that right, but he basically has been, for the most part, kind of the voice of reason through the couple of episodes of the series so far, all 2 episodes of it, other than some maybe questionable choices he may have made, or maybe not even questionable choices with his wife earlier, but maybe how it was presented and how he handled the situation. Since then, he has been more or less the voice of reason when it comes down to other people on his council wanting to take very aggressive action on certain steps, and he has the more generalized overview of the realm and all the kingdoms and how he wants to keep that safe. And the best way to keep it prosperous and safe is to make sure there's not war, there's not a lot of infighting as much as possible. So he definitely is a guy that wants to go more of the diplomatic routes when at all possible. Maybe to a fault, but we'll have to see what happens with that one. But he basically is the voice of reason. There's a lot of intrigue, and there's a lot of different things that are pulling him in different interests in different directions for their own benefit, but we'll have to see who's actually working with him and telling him the truth. Again, I guess that's just kind of Game of Thrones. We got Rhaenyra, if I say her name right, who is an interesting character. She is kind of handling everything as good as you would expect. I mean, that's literally her character. I mean, she's kind of put in the role of, this is the antagonist, and we really want to, root for her and make sure everything goes well, even though she's in kind of horrible, not horrible, but just hard situations. I mean, some of them are pretty horrible with what happened with her family, but it is of the time and everything else that's happening. So she's almost too good. Like, she's pretty much handling, again, the situations exactly like you would want them to be handled, which probably will alter and change a little bit here in the future, I'm assuming, when some groundbreaking revelations are made public to everybody. But her character is pretty solid. Again, I think she's just coping with the loss of her mother and brother, and then dealing with the craziness that is her family, and then also being put into a position of you are the heir to the 7 kingdoms. So she's kind of coming along. I really enjoy her working actually with her cousin, Damon, who's another one that's... this is odd, because when the show first started, 1 episode ago, I definitely would have told you that he was kind of being set up to be the most villainous and the least likable. But dang if I haven't kind of found my way cheering for him a little bit. I mean, he's definitely an over-the-top, pretty violent character, but he's got a lot of rational thinking that's going on to a certain extent. He also doesn't have tact, or he's kind of just an asshole, which, I mean, there's no rule against being an asshole. It just means you're not super pleasant to be around, which would be him in a nutshell. But that doesn't mean that he's not telling the truth, or maybe even has his family's best interest in mind. So, I mean, definitely has his own interest in mind, paramount. But he's an interesting one, so there's definitely layers going on with that one. Now we get to the Hightowers. The Hightowers are the family who is the hand of the king, Otto Hightower, I believe. I can't get a read on him, and I think that's the point. I definitely think that he is a character that has been put in front of us to be a very solid, good guy. Because when you look back at the original Game of Thrones episode, or season 1, the Hand of the King was Stark, and he was definitely the noble, right, doing good by everybody kind of guy, kind of like the King Viserys is. And he's got that twinge of, every once in a while he's definitely got his plans, and he's plotting as well by, working with his daughter, and giving her some suggestions on what she should be doing with her free time and who she should be keeping company with. But I definitely don't wholeheartedly trust them. So I like what they're doing here. They give us a little of that. Oh, this is the hand of the king. You know hands of kings. They're trustworthy. They're trustworthy, and he might be, or he might not. I'm unclear, but I mean, I guess again that's kind of the point. So it's doing its job pretty well in that one. Nice job, writers. Of course, the writing would be nothing if you didn't have good acting to go with that. And honestly, the actors, pretty much top to bottom on this, have really kept me captivated. Again, it might be something said about me not knowing a lot of the actors from outside of these roles, where these characters, I see them as these actors, and they're definitely taking it to heart, and they're doing a good job. Again, the Doctor Who guy, I had not seen Doctor Who before, so my experience of him is basically this slithery, kind of snaky character, dragon-esque, I guess you might say. But I'm kind of digging him because he's multifaceted, and again, there's different layers to what's going on there. So overall, the acting I think is fantastic. The cinematography in this one, especially this episode, I think it's just as good as before. I actually thought the graphics were a little better, but it may have been because they were a little more focused on some dragons. The dragon scene that they have in this one's pretty freaking awesome. There's also less big sweeping shots of like showing the cities and some of the locations in more of a grandiose manner, so it kind of makes them it seems less CGI to me. I mean, these seem more lived in and somewhat real. I mean, Dragonstone is not necessarily real looking, but man, it did remind me. I mean, I guess it looks just like it did in Game of Thrones, but a little more magical maybe. I don't know, it was pretty solid. But between that and then the music, hey, I may be crazy, but I don't remember seeing the actual trailer, or not the trailer, but the opening title screen in the episode 1. This one, they had it back. It was Game of Thrones-esque-ish title scene. You had the good old soundtrack back into it. And then honestly, I didn't really notice a lot of the music in this one. So not good nor bad, I guess, but I definitely didn't notice too much of it till the beginning and the end. But I think that was kind of also how Game of Thrones was. I don't know, maybe I'm completely wrong with that one. But overall, I thought the music was pretty solid. Again, the opening montage, the opening credits, pretty solid. It's good to have those things back. So my main takeaways from this episode, I have some positives and negatives. My positives were definitely, I really appreciated this one because I felt like I understood who everybody was. The first episode I thoroughly enjoyed too, but this one, that was a lot of setup and getting to know the characters. When this one, as things were happening, I wasn't struggling to be like, okay, that's this person related to that one. It was like, no, I just kind of knew who it was, and it was getting a little more comfortable, so that was solid. And that happened pretty quickly for me, which isn't always the case. It took like the whole first season. Not that I'm going to remember everybody by any means. I'm sure you guys are sitting there banging your heads on the table because I'm saying everybody's name wrong. But I definitely felt like I understood what was happening with that a little bit better, actually a lot bit better than episode 1. Like I said previously, and I keep mentioning, it's the characters. The characters in this one are so layered because it's not just straight, mustache twirling villain. A is going to be the bad guy, and our hero or heroine over here is going to be, clean cut the person that's here. I was just watching a movie that I hadn't seen. Oh, what was it? I think it was the new Jurassic World movie, and that was just so bad, and for so many reasons. There weren't the standard stereotypical archetypes. There are in the show, but at the same time, just like in real life, it's not 100% black or white. There's a lot of gray area when it comes to making decisions, and especially when you're ruling or governing over a set body of people. You're not going to make everybody happy, but you have to try and make these decisions that are best for the people, but also for yourself. And what this show does a really good job of is making sure that people are multidimensional for the most part. There's always been a time where you can kind of understand somebody's point of view in Game of Thrones. For the most part. The scariest villain is always the one that thinks that they're right. I briefly mentioned it before, but the dragon visuals in this one were pretty sweet. There weren't necessarily a lot of close-ups of the dragons. There was a couple, but there was kind of a standoff between a couple of dragons, and I got to really appreciate the difference in dragons. Maybe the ages and the types, but the colors, it was pretty freaking sweet. The showrunners have done a great job at building the world, too. I definitely feel like I'm back in Westeros and living at King's Landing for the most part, or at Dragonstone, so I definitely feel like I'm back in the world. More than that, I feel like I'm in the world that Game of Thrones kind of had talked about when they talked about, the rise of the civilization and the Targaryen Empire. When you start to see what in Game of Thrones they were talking about people knowing their roles, and they're really looking out. This is how all the Seven Kingdoms were functioning together at one point. It's kind of interesting to see, and I appreciate that, and I really do like it, because it is a good bit different than Game of Thrones, where everything was kind of falling apart and trying to rebuild and restructure, whereas this is set, and it's rolling, and let's just see how it's going. So that was a really cool thing to have on there. The other big thing that I really appreciated was that the characters, honestly, there were several conversations that happened where they just talked like normal people. Whether it was Daemon and Rhaenyra, talking as cousins, they talked to each other like cousins did. When it was King Viserys was consulting with one of his council members, in the chambers alone, it was more of a, I want you to tell me what you actually think. There were a lot of those types of things that kind of came through, and it seemed like it was more realistic to a certain extent. And I've seen some dialogue in other shows where you're just like, that doesn't seem right. Even though, this is a very far off time and strange mythical land, it seems somewhat relatable how they talk to each other, which I really appreciated. Honestly, when it gets to the negatives, I don't have a ton of negatives on this one. One of them, which might be a mild spoiler if you haven't watched the episode, but it has to deal with the decision that the king made about who his future wife is going to be. I didn't quite get that yet, but that could be something that could be altered down the line that definitely makes a whole bunch more sense. But the whole point of this episode, and good bits of the first episode, kind of seem like, the king is talking to his family, or is being talked to about the responsibilities of the king and the ruler. And in this case, it is the responsibility of the ruler to make sure that the kingdom prospers and the realm is good, stays peaceful, and as many people get to live as happy as possible for as long as possible. And this king is continually told that in order, the best option to make that happen is to marry one specific person out of a specific family, and join families, and build a stronger realm. And he kind of just goes against the grain on that and just does what he wants, even though they kind of repeatedly, they were marking home that this is so important that you do this, and then just kind of pulls a 180 and does the other, which is kind of weird because he as a character, has had to remind his daughter and himself what his responsibilities and their responsibilities are. So I'm interested to see if that comes back for some other reason than it's just what he wanted more. Because it seems like most of what decisions have been made or going to be made is made for the decisions for the betterment of the realm, and he wasn't quite logically thinking the same on this specific thing. But again, I reserve judgment for the fact I'd be able to come back, and after the fact it might be taken care of. But pretty much that was the only thing that kind of rubbed me wrong negatively on this one. Not even rubbed me wrong, it was just something I noticed. I was like, yeah, that's a little off. But overall, I thought that was still, it's not too horrible of a negative. Overall, I would highly recommend that you watch this episode. I actually think I may have liked it a little more than the first episode, but it wouldn't have been as good without the first episode, if you know what I mean. Because you needed all that set up in the first episode to get to this one to where it feels a little bit more lived in. There's the time jump of 6 months, maybe it's a little bit more than that now, but that makes it feel lived in to where you've gotten the characters a little bit more established and you don't have to really worry about the reactions to a couple of these things. You get to move on to the next thing, and I dig that, and it's kind of just progressing the story. I'm kind of in for it, so I don't think I gave the first one a ranking, but I mean, if that was out of 10, the first episode was probably, honestly, I probably give that one more like 6.57, okay, and that was just because I had a hard time kind of keeping up where things were going, and the violence was a little, I just didn't dig some of it. I didn't think it was needed. This one, I'll probably actually go 7.58, maybe 7.75. Yeah, right in the middle of there somewhere, because again, I felt like this felt like Game of Thrones to me, very much so a Game of Thrones episode. People positioning, jockeying, you know, trying to get 2 cents in, talking a little bit in the ear over there. Wasn't overly violent. There was a little bit of that. There was some good visuals. You can start to see how the chess pieces are aligning to start with. Of course, you know, in Game of Thrones, that's never how it ends, because everything just, you know, triple jumps, back row, boom, good to go. So I'm on board for it. I can't wait to see the 3rd episode. I think that one just came out, so I'm going to have to get on that one pretty quick. But yeah, let me know what you think. Do you agree? Am I completely off base with most of my review here? But overall, I've enjoyed it thoroughly. Let me know what you guys think. Who do you think is going to come out on top, and what's going to happen next? I'm very excited. Peace out.